Good afternoon, everybody. I propose maybe that we wait for 1 or 2 extra minutes so that everybody can connect. Then I will go through the agenda to see what interesting topics we can discuss today. Then we will present the two expert speakers today, and then we will start with the webinar. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to use the chat on the right side. As well, it can be interactive and nice if you say in the chat where you are, what's interesting for you, or just say hello, so that we know that you are there and active. Perfect. Good to read. Different nationalities, different companies. I hope you will all learn something today. Once again, don't hesitate to interact. We want this session to be interactive, so that you learn something. So let's start maybe concerning the agenda. Nick, can you put the slide? Perfect. The agenda on today, first we will present Comarch, then we will present TreeFinance, in case you don't know what we do and how we can help. Then there are three main topics during this webinar. First, we will tackle some legal compliance issues, of course, based on e-invoicing. Then we will see how we can approach this on the global level. And then the third point will be some project and process improvements, how to optimize your project and be sure to take the best out of your resources and the invoices. Then, of course, we will finish with the Q&A. Don't hesitate to, once again, to ask questions. As well, we will launch some polls during the sessions, so it will appear on the right side as well. I wish you a great webinar. I give now the floor to Nick.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Nick Vandenberg. I've been working in e-invoicing for over 5 years, mainly working for e-invoicing providers and now working for TreeFinance as their e-invoicing expert. I'm serving mainly Fortune 500 companies, advising them on what strategy they need to take when it comes to global e-invoicing, as well as local governments on how to increase adoption within the country and how to handle mandates. I will give a welcome now to my co-speaker Bartek and let him introduce himself.
Not ideal start. We see that Bartek has a connection problem. I hope he will be soon back, but I can introduce Bartek. Bartek worked at Comarch since over 15 years. He's head of data exchange and document manager. So is used to work in project automations. He has a lot of experience working as well, like Nick said, with Fortune 500 companies, but also with some smaller ones. I hope he will be back soon.
Yeah, he just told me he's back. He's coming back now.
Okay, perfect.
Hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Hello, so sorry for this interruption, but I had some issues regarding the connection. So my name is Bartek Witowicz. I am representing Comarch. I've been dealing with the e-invoicing for many years. So I've started with EDI and supply chain digitization in different areas. Then when e-invoicing came into force, 15 or 20 years ago, depending on the countries. I was engaged in this area. I've been representing the consulting department. I am responsible for various markets. I worked in several countries when the invoicing was implemented. So I hope to share my experience today with you. Thank you. Regarding the company, so Comarch has been founded in 1993 as a company founded by the professor, the owner of the company in Krakow from the university background. Currently, we've got more than 6,500 employees sitting in several countries and several continents. So we've got a global presence. We've been developing our own products. So we are the software house. 93% of the revenues, as you can see, comes from our own products. Most of them are recognized by some expert companies, depending on the areas they are representing. So even regarding the invoicing, we've been mentioned in the reports from Gartner or Forrester. Our customers and are from various continents, so we expanded into several countries, depending on the client also and the strategy from the company owners. You can see that we are worldwide with different locations in different countries and different continents, and we've got in green we've got projects also in various countries like India or South Africa. Regarding the portfolio, so our aim, my business unit department's aim is to connect the partners together to enable them the communication, the electronic communication, and switch from the paper documents exchange to the electronic document exchange. So we are, before switching to the e-invoicing, we also recommend the companies to think about other processes to be digitalized to improve the quality of e-invoices, like transactional documents before the invoicing, like orders, like goods receipts. And also we are providing the software for synchronizing the product master data to talk in the same language to each other to decrease the number of discrepancies in the communication. Okay, and regarding our platform, so we've been offering the software as a service platform. So Nick, can you switch to the next slide? And we've been processing more than 600 million of the documents, electronic documents annually. We've got about 100 types of documents, so different messages. Of course, most of them are exchanges, orders, dispatch advices, ASNs, receiving advices, invoices, inventory reports, sales reports. However, we can adjust the library of our message types to different various processes. Regarding the legal compliance, so we are following the legislation in different countries, and we are cooperating with either consulting companies locally or with the governmental representatives or with the partner companies in the countries where the local presence is required and where the Comarch does not have the office locally. So regarding these message flows, we've got more than 130 companies, entities exchanging the documents from various countries, and we are supporting the service desk in various languages depending on the customer's experience. So regarding the global project, it's really important to have this support in the local language, especially when cooperating with smaller local companies. Okay.
Yeah, so now I will talk a bit about TreeFinance very shortly, and then we will go over to the main topic of the webinar today.
Yeah.
But just to give you a brief overview, because I think most of you don't know TreeFinance. TreeFinance is an international network organization that mainly focuses on finance and control consultancy. We are present in around 4 countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Germany. We have over 800 professionals working for us. I'm working for a specialized business unit within the Netherlands. So I work for the financial management services, and we focus on the purchase to pay, order to cash, and record to report process. and mainly on process optimization, digitization, and how to handle global complex topics. To move forward, just a little bit about our e-invoicing propositions. One of our main e-invoicing propositions is the e-invoicing compliance knowledge base that we've built. There we have all the legislations in over 110 countries. Then we have country-specific regulatory overviews. So we deep dive a bit more into what you actually need to do in the country. We have an e-invoicing strategy and approach roadmap development. So together with your company, we look at how to approach global e-invoicing and what your strategy should be. Afterwards, we always do a vendor selection. So we choose the best vendor that fits with your process and your strategy and your approach. And then we have a little bit after the implementation phase where we do the process integration and optimization, and we can deliver onboarding support where needed. Just a quick overlook. This is Electronic Invoicing Global, just a screenshot. If you want to visit the link, you can go to www.electronicinvoicing.global. As I said, the largest database with the current and upcoming e-invoicing regulations. Now on to the main topic. When it comes to legal compliance, there are different types of modules. And these are the three topics that we will talk about when it comes to e-invoicing compliance, with one being the different types of models, why it's complicated for a multinational organization to handle these kind of modules, and what the future looks like. So first of all, Bartek, I want to ask you, what are the different types of compliancy models you see around the world?
Okay, so regarding the models, regulatory models worldwide. So most of us in Europe, because I can see that most of the participants come from Europe. So we know the post-audit model where the invoices were sent from the senders to the recipient, and the tax auditors came after or appeared after a few years to control the transactions. And this model was and is valid in several countries. And in Latin America, we've got different model, clearance model. The reason for implementing this clearance model was that the governments in Brazil, Mexico, and other Latin countries wanted to combat the tax frauds and reduce the VAT gap. And from this model, more and more companies in Europe thought about the better control over the transactions. So we've got the Italy, for instance, that implemented the clearance model, so the SDI platform, where the senders sends the documents and the recipients takes their invoices from that platform. So this is the clearance model where the flow has to go via the governmental platforms. And a similar platform has been implemented, for instance, in Turkey. And then the different clearance model is in Latin countries where you need to validate the invoice before it is delivered to the final recipient. So the invoice, after creating the invoice has to be sent in the proper format to the governmental platform. Then the invoice is verified, approved. If it is approved correctly, then the invoice is sent back to the sender and then can be delivered to the recipient by the sender. So we can see that more and more companies are thinking about the clearance model, and some of the companies also implemented this model partially, making for instance, the B2G flows mandatory to be exchanged via the governmental platforms. This is the case of France, for instance, where we've got the Chorus Pro, via which all the invoices sent to the governmental entities should be processed. And this Chorus Pro is to be extended in the coming years in 2024 to the also B2B flows. And what is the third option, which we can see, for instance, in Hungary, that the companies need to report the invoice data. So the sender is sending the invoices to the recipient, but parallelly, the company should report the data from the invoices sent to the tax authorities in the specific format, in the specific timeline, and via the specific channel. So what we can see, more and more countries will go into this direction. PEPL and mostly European framework. However, we can see that PEPL will be extended in other countries, other good geographies like Australia, New Zealand, or Singapore, is accepted and is approved by some governments like in Belgium, for instance. So via this network, we can see that the companies, especially exchanging the documents in the Western or Northern Europe, can use this network, and we can see that more and more countries are following PEPL, and it will be also the standard worldwide. Okay, here you can see some of the logos of the governmental platforms. What is new? We've got the plans that in Poland we've got the KSeF. We've been discussing specifications and the requirements regarding the reporting to the Polish authorities. We've been engaged in the discussion also regarding Saudi Arabia, where the obligation comes into force next week. Comarch has been analyzing and applying for the authorization to become the provider. So country by country, it's different. There are different formats. Some of the countries are following the pioneers with implementing their own modifications. I think that it's clear. What do you think, Nick? What are the next steps regarding the implementation of the governmental platforms?
Yeah, so as you explained, there's the three different kinds of modules, and actually what you see is that the post-audit module is the most common in Western Europe, as you said. But even that's changing at the moment, because even in Germany with the new coalition, they have actually drafted up an e-invoicing regulation in their coalition accord. And that is something that you see happening, right? You see all these countries, they're announcing clearance modules, and they're adapting to a way to close that VAT gap of a couple of billion. Western Europe is also not the part where you would look into closing the VAT gap, because it's not that big of an issue. If you look more to the Latin American countries, and the reason why they changed is because they have VAT gaps of over 50 billion, right? So if you're going to look at that, that's quite a lot. What makes it difficult, just to tap into the next subject, for countries to follow all these regulations is one, they're announced very shortly from time to time. But next to that, every single module is different. Like if you can connect to SDI, it doesn't mean you can connect to Chorus. And if you connect to FACE, the Spanish governmental platform, it doesn't mean you can connect to SDI. So everyone has their specific regulations, their specific technical documentations, details, electronic signatures. So it varies in all these countries, which just makes it difficult to manage. And I can imagine that, for example, for you, Bartek, as a company, as Comarch, it's also quite a hassle to keep up with all these regulations and make sure that Comarch is legally compliant. Am I not?
Yeah, exactly. So regarding the countries, we can see that the legal compliance is really challenging for the companies. So there are different level of know-how regarding the countries. Some of the companies have already heard about some deadlines and are asking about the Comarch capabilities to support them in some areas, and some of them are really aware, and they analyze the documentation and are prepared to implement. However, it is really hard to follow for the companies whose core business is somewhere far from invoicing, to follow up the regulations, because it is really common, especially in some Southern Europe, Asian Latin countries that the deadlines are pretty short. So you can, like in Turkey, we had in the past that we learned about some changes in the specifications few days or weeks before the deadline.
Yeah, so that's also an issue that you see now when it comes to the Middle Eastern or the APAC region, so Asian Pacific, is that France gives you time, right? Poland gives you time as well. They announce it at the end of 2020, and it's being implemented in 2024. But if you look at Saudi Arabia, for example, they announced it 4th of December 2020, and the regulations are going in next week. So that's 4th of December 2021. So you only have a year to prepare. Furthermore, sometimes I have the feeling when I see these announcements or when I talk to the specific tax authorities themselves that they don't actually know what they're announcing yet. They know that they want a mandate, they know that they want some equity invoicing, but it's not really clear what kind of model it will be, what the technical documentation will be. Saudi Arabia, they posted their technical documentation, I think 6 months ago. So you only have like half a year to prepare for the regulations. And for a company, especially multinational organizations working with working in specific ways, like your IT department is working in a specific way, your finance department is working in a specific way. Sometimes it's too late. I've talked to customers of mine, for example, that say, yeah, we work in 6-month sprints. And sometimes the technical documentation comes after those 6 months. So after we've just created a sprint, so we cannot create a different sprint for this. And we have multiple change requests saying that the tax department right now is the department with the most change requests within the company, which at first they didn't even have any change requests to the IT department. So that's really something that you can see that's quite a challenge, especially with the Asian Pacific countries.
Yeah, I agree with you. However, in my opinion, it's better to have the implementation, the obligation, and the deadline indications than to have nothing. So it's time consuming, and the time pressure on the implementation is pretty high. It's stressful for the companies and for the providers. However, in most of the countries, from my experience, the authorities give some period without controls. So
it give around a 3-month period to get used to the regulations, like SDI, for example, and probably Saudi Arabia will do the same, and most European countries will do the same as well. Indeed.
Yeah, exactly, because it's hard for the companies to make some changes in the ERP when they are required to put some additional data to the invoice. So it takes time. Yeah, however, I think that more and more countries will focus on this clearance model, because especially in the pandemic era, they would like to improve the budget situation after this hard year and years actually. So I think that the newcomers will join. I think that recently the Central and Eastern European countries like Romania, Slovakia, or Bulgaria have already started analysis regarding the governmental platform, clearance platform, or the reporting model. And regarding the current countries where the platform has already been implemented, I think that the scope will be extended to the B2C, as we had recently in the Hungary, or to export-import transactions, to have better control over these transactions after get used to the local ones. And what I can see, just to sum up regarding this legal compliance topic, is that we will have probably further accounting improvements. So from having this invoice data on the governmental platforms, then there will be less burden on the companies to create the VAT declarations, VAT reports, VAT returns, documentation. So I think that they will be pre-filled based on the invoice data, and then the companies will just need to approve or slightly modify them, so it will be less burden on the companies. Okay, so we've got different models, but regarding the different models, we need to also know how our organization is prepared to the e-invoicing project. So what is the structure, what is the IT landscape, what are the resources? So Within this part, we would like to discuss the approach, what are the best approaches to the invoicing project, what are the advantages of the harmonization of such invoicing projects, and the mistakes. So we can see the topics that will be covered. Regarding the approach, Nick, what do you think from your experience? What is mostly chosen model regarding the invoicing?
Well, how I wrote an article about this about 6 months ago and created this module because this is the way I see companies approach electronic invoicing. And basically, oh, that went by mistake. Sorry. Basically, I see the three most common ones that I see are decentralized and reactive, centralized and reactive, and decentralized and proactive. Those are the most common modules that I see. So I will just quickly explain what reactive, proactive, centralized, and decentralized means in this infographic. What reactive means is that you're actually acting when last minute. So when you hear about the regulations last minute and are looking for a provider and you're not proactively up to date. Then proactive, of course, means that you constantly are being updated on what the regulations are. That can be via a consultancy company, that can be via a platform like eInvoicing Global, but you constantly stay up to date with what's happening in the world and if the current regulations are changing or the upcoming regulations are changing. And then we have centralized and decentralized. Decentralized meaning I have 20 offices around the world and every office needs to solve it themselves. We're not doing this on HQ level. We're letting the office in Brazil decide how they want to approach the Brazilian clearance model. We're letting the office in Italy decide how they want to approach the Italian clearance model. And for example, the Polish company or office decide how they want to approach the upcoming clearance model in Poland. And then the centralized approach is having one single provider that can handle all your compliancy needs. When looking at the decentralized and reactive approach, which I actually saw in some companies and was quite surprised that this is existing, is that they let all the offices find out themselves, and they hear about the regulations last minute, which means that I have talked to companies that are receiving fines of up to 200,000 euros because they're not in time with the regulatory changes. So there's a high risk on potential penalties. Then they get the penalty and they suddenly have to look for a provider locally, or they have to ask the provider if they can comply with the regulations. There's a high risk on disruption in resource planning. A client of mine once told me I constantly need to put my best people on e-invoicing projects because I don't know when the regulations are happening or what's changing or what's coming up. And then there's a high risk and a high implementation cost. Maybe at the beginning it will look like, hey, we only have to pay a very small fee to this small provider in Brazil and a very small fee to this provider in Italy or in Poland, etc. But at some point it's all going to stack up until like you have paid in every single country, you have paid an implementation cost which with one provider, you can just pay a one-time implementation cost for all countries. And then the other one I see that is most common is the centralized reactive way. So I hear companies saying, yeah, well, we do have a centralized provider like Comarch or a different one. And we do actually, we are ready when it comes to place, but sometimes we're not quite there yet. And we still notice that we have to follow up quite last minute. So we still have to put our best people constantly on these type of projects, and we have the feeling that we are not in control. And centralized and proactive being the best way to reach that. I have actually not met one single company that is there, that has a centralized and actually knows what's happening in the world in all their offices. So that's quite a hassle to get to this point. Also knowing that in some countries, you have to have a specific provider that is situated in that country. So for example, China or Russia or India. And it can be quite a hassle sometimes for big, large providers to find a specific partner there. And these are basically the four kinds of ways that I see companies approaching them. Decentralized proactive, I have heard it once, but it's not a very common module. It's the one I actually see the least out of the three below. And centralized proactive, I've never seen actually.
Okay.
There's of course other models too. There's maybe 2 or 3 more, but I would highly suggest not going there. And that's when you build your own product or you build your own e-invoicing suite, which is recommendable maybe if you are only present in one country, but don't do it if you're present in a multinational organization. So how do you see this, Bartek? What do you think? What is the most common model you've seen?
Regarding our business area, we can see that the companies and significant majority of the companies, especially operating in different countries, they are choosing this centralized model for sure. And regarding proactive, reactive, it depends. So it depends on the, let's say, position of the company. So if they can be proactive, whether they can influence and have the impact on the business partners to speed up the invoicing process. Most of them are trying at least, so we are convincing the companies to be the proactive. However, centralized reactive is also common. However, we can see that it takes time to get the satisfactory KPIs regarding the project. And after the first country rollout, we can see that the attention of the management, attention of the engagement of the resources is the issue, and we can see that the projects are not that well perceived as the proactive ones. From my experience, even this year, I can say that more and more companies have been implementing the new ERP systems, or they are upgrading the ERP systems, or they are harmonizing them because, for instance, due to mergers, acquisitions in the past, they are interested in the unifying the ERP landscape. And before harmonization, so on the slide you can see that they had ERP in different countries or in different business units. They have really the various partners to support invoicing, not always e-invoicing, but invoicing. So they cooperated with VAN networks. They cooperated with different providers depending on the countries. Often we can see that the providers were chosen in the past, and these are the local companies who are able to provide the services, to guarantee the services in the particular country or maximum the neighboring country. And also they are sending the emails via different providers. So we can see that some of the companies have been using the web portals because they are forced in the countries like France, for instance, to type, or Hungary to type in the reports via the portals because the volume are pretty low. So this is really complex to manage such landscape in the long time, especially as from my perspective, often, and I would say even always, the people from the headquarters are engaged partially in such projects in each country, and it is really hard for them to have different providers, to have different project managers within the company responsible without having the clear view. What is the plan? What is the timeline? Where we should be within the few months or a few years? So with this ERP harmonization or ERP upgrade, we can see that companies have been considering also the e-invoicing approach. So from last few months, we can see regarding RFPs that the companies have been trying to harmonize the e-invoicing landscape. So with 1 or 2 instances of the ERPs implemented within the companies, and it is mostly planned for few years. So we can see that the approach is either for the smaller companies to make the big bang approach, so to switch off the previous providers and to move to one provider, one single provider, which would guarantee the cooperation with all the business partners. However, the more common is the phased-based model, following either the legislation in the countries. So, okay, let's go to Saudi Arabia. We've got low volumes, but it is mandatory there. So let's go to Saudi Arabia. Another approach is that the countries implement the ERP and then they are switching to new e-invoicing provider. So, okay, I am cooperating with the previous provider with this old system. However, after rolling out the new ERP, I will move to the new service provider. Sometimes it happens that regarding our experience, we are cooperating with new ERP, but also with the previous one, especially when the ERP upgrade and harmonization has delays. So it is also what we can see. So having one provider and harmonized ERP landscape gives the better possibility to have the high quality of data and the reports regarding the transactions with the business partners. So this is important to get the reliable data, to have the economy of scale, so synergy effect when you are talking with the service provider with volumes of the invoices higher than lower. Also, you've got upgrade in the IT environment regarding the comparing to the previous technology used country by country. You can also implement some collaboration tools with the providers, because the invoicing and the exchange of the invoices is one thing, but also you can add some tools that improve the collaborations like claim management or some contracts negotiation, or even invoice reconciliation process is improved via these tools. And what we can see also from my perspective, labor is the challenging part, because more and more companies have had some people responsible for the interfaces from their systems, and there is a lack of such labor available. People are retiring, so we can see that really with this harmonized, centralized approach, we've got the high priority projects, management attention, and the better KPIs. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think the most important part is that I think, of course, you can see more and more ERP upgrades. That's something I'm seeing as well. You see people upgrading to SAP S/4HANA and all different kinds of ERPs. But even before you have an upgrade to an ERP harmonization, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to that you cannot go for a centralized e-invoicing provider, or that you cannot go for a couple of e-invoicing providers, because it doesn't. What I always recommend, at least, is you don't need to have a deep technical integration with your e-invoicing provider. You can usually solve it quite quickly by using just communication channels that are more like plug and play, and you can actually work around your different ERP systems if necessary. And even if you have multiple ERPs, you can always go to an integration service platform like Delboomi or something to connect to your e-invoicing provider. So it doesn't mean that if you have different ERPs that it needs to be that you also need to have different e-invoicing providers. You can already do this before you even have one centralized ERP, or you have harmonized your ERP landscape.
Yeah,
that's a mistake I see commonly making, is that people always say, well, we have to wait before we have our ERP integration, or before we have our ERP upgrade, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I agree. However, I can see that the factor for starting the discussion within the companies is the changing of ERP or some improvements of ERPs, or acquiring another company. So without any changes in the IT landscape or in the organization, I can see that there is low interest in changing or switching to the invoicing.
Yeah, definitely. Moving to the last and final topic to talk about project and process management. There's different ways that you can approach a project. I mean, you can, and the question I mostly get is actually, how do we set up an international e-invoicing project? But next to that, you have what are the best practices in project methodology, and which departments should we engage, where we're also seeing a huge shift coming from the customers I thought I would speak to when moving into a consultancy firm, especially a finance consultancy firm. Comparing that to the actual people I speak to right now, it's way different. But to start off with the most common question I get from the market is, okay, so we have this issue. We have multiple countries where we need to be compliant in e-invoicing. We don't know where to start, and we don't know what to exactly do. So what the best approach is always create an as-is situation. So what is your presence, and what are the invoices per country? What are the invoices per client type? Which kind of businesses do I handle? Do I have mostly business to government? Do I have mostly business to business, or mostly business to consumer? And what is the local presence per country that we have? Then next to that, there's also the current IT landscape where we just talked about right now. Like, do I have multiple ERP systems? Do I have to harmonize them? Which systems are involved in the finance and tax process? And then the to-be situation. So where do we go from here? What are the current regulations I have to comply? And do I already know in which countries I have to comply in the future? And what is the required IT infrastructure per country? What do I need? Do I need to have specific QR codes? Do I need to have specific e-signatures, et cetera, et cetera? Once you have those two, it's actually moving to the roadmap that you can create for your own organization. Is doing a gap analysis, then doing an impact analysis. What will the impact be on the different departments? And next to that, having a software provider selection process and choosing the correct provider, which could be any provider. You can have a decentralized approach, centralized approach, but this is the way to go. It doesn't matter what your approach is. This should be what you're doing first, and then create a timeline. So when do I implement in this country? When do I implement in that country? When do I implement in France, Poland, etc.? So that you have your resource planning in control and you know exactly when and where to go. What do you think about this, Bartek? Do you think this is a good starting point, or do you have different starting points, or what is the most common thing you see in the market?
I can see that making this exercise internally within the company makes the project easier, because regarding the requirements, we can see when negotiating the contract that we've got some information. However, after signing the contract and going deeper into the details, we can see that the scope differs and the priorities also are different. We can adjust. However, it seems that the more attention and the more resources are engaged in the analysis phase and the requirements collections, expectations from the business sponsors within the company, the smoother, the better analysis and the project implementation phase. So yeah, this is important too.
Yeah, important thing you said there is like having an organized project team. So how would you see the project team going, and how do you see the planning of it going?
Yeah, just one comment before, because just one case from recent months, we could see that we signed the contract for a few countries with the client, and we agreed the timeline with the headquarters, and now we've got the discussion, let's say softly, between the countries, which country should be implemented first. So it takes time. It takes like a few weeks to wait for the final decision. So the sooner the company has the overview and the final decisions, the better for the project implementations. Regarding the organization of the project, so resources required for the analysis is really important. So the availability of the resources on the customer sites and the documentation availability, because we can see that the companies have been using the providers or the solutions for many years, and one or two persons knows what are really in these specifications in the systems, and it is really hard to find their time to analyze and to have the final decisions, whether we are creating the mappings, we are creating the validations. So it's really important to plan the resources on the customer side to be engaged in this analysis process. And before starting such a project, invoicing is AP or AR, right? So it is also the decision to be taken because, for instance, the IT department received the business case from the AP team. However, maybe they should ask AR team whether they are planning some digitalization of the process, because it's important to plan the resources and to get the synergy effect. Regarding the development, so the more attention paid during the analysis phase, the more documentation available, it is really better for the development to have less discrepancies, less modifications later on in the UAT phase, when the companies are testing and then they are not satisfied because the people were not engaged. So this is also important to have the availability of resources on the customer sides. And rollouts, and what is specific to sum up in this e-invoicing projects, comparing to implementation of the system internally, is that firstly we've got the new partners, new vendors, new customers coming, and some of them we need to offboard because we are not cooperating, we stopped the cooperation with them. So the e-invoicing project is really not completing at one stage and then we can forget about this. So we need to be in touch with the client project manager, because we need to know about the new partners coming, new requirements, and of course new legislations, changes in the current legislation or new requirements in the legislation. So it's also important. And yeah, so from my opinion, regarding e-invoicing, we should be really agile regarding the methodology, because the environment is really changing pretty fast.
Yeah, I can see that too. Is there, if I can ask you a question from like your experience over the past year, what are the people you're mostly talking to when it comes to an e-invoicing project? For which department are they?
Okay, so regarding AP projects, so
no, but just e-invoicing projects, so legal compliance e-invoicing. So what are the people you're actually talking to?
So we've got the accounting people engaged, always AP or AR side engaged in the discussion, always IT people responsible for the IT environment, and depending on the sites, there are sometimes procurement and customer service people engaged in the discussion. So the people who are in day-by-day contact with the customers or with the vendors, so they know what is the day-by-day specific in the cooperation with the clients. They know their pain points, they know their IT maturity. So it is important to get such people engaged also at some stage of the process.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because those were actually the people that I was expecting to talk to when I moved to Tree Finance. Mostly accounting people, AR, AP, when it comes to global e-invoicing. But there's kind of a shift going on that we see in this world, and it's quite interesting that the only people that I'm talking to now actually are tax people. I am only talking to global indirect tax managers, or a whole tax team, or IT tax managers. So that's one of the factors that I've seen being involved now, next to the normal departments that are involved, which is the finance team, that is responsible for, of course, the sending of invoices and receiving of invoices. and eventually the IT team, of course, because they're responsible for system integrations and system adaptations. But one major player I've seen entering or one major department that I've seen entering this market and mainly asking the questions are the ones responsible, of course, talking to the tax authorities and handling the tax requests. And I think I'm seeing a change for even some registrants from this webinar. I saw that mostly tax people now instead of actually the finance people in this market. So that's quite an interesting change I'm seeing. And also something to keep into account, because at some point it is going to be a tax topic. And with the rollout of all these countries and mandates and clearance modules, I can definitely see that it's more and more becoming something that will be the responsibility of the tax department than the finance department.
Oh, this information worries me because because this means that the companies are following the regulations, and I think that they should look for the optimization, automation of the process. So
that's true, but it's kind of hard focusing on the optimization and the automation of the process if you're a multinational company and every country after each other is announcing new regulations. So for some companies, it's just not viable anymore to look at the process optimization and automation part, but they have to look at the part of where they have to be compliant with the regulations, because they constantly have to adapt to those regulations. Like it's not like 2 or 3 years ago or 4 years ago anymore, where maybe 1 or 2 countries per year were announcing new regulations. No, I have seen companies that have to adapt to 7 or 8 countries in 1 year, which then you can say, like, of course it worries me as well, because e-invoicing, from my perspective, was always meant to have process optimization and automation part. But because all these countries are announcing it now, you sort of have to set the project optimization and automation part aside and actually go for the compliancy. Not if you only have to be compliant in 1 country per year or something like that. But if you have to be compliant in more than 5 countries, the thing you're going to have to focus on is compliancy, and it's not focus on process optimization. You can do it afterwards, after you've rolled it out. But my main the main trend that I'm seeing is that it's becoming more of a tax topic, and actually tax is going to be involved for the next couple of 5 to 6 years until most of the countries have announced their clearance modules and most of the countries have adapted to it.
Yeah, I can see the similar situation, similar case that regulations has the huge impact. However, I can see that companies where you've got, for instance, like in France, the B2G obligation, some of the companies are also thinking parallelly about the B2B flows automation. So they are skipping emails, PDFs, and if they are ready for exchange with governmental platforms, structure files, then they are also trying to extend it for the other flows, like B2B flows.
Yeah, so that's when you actually have time to look at the process optimization and automation and the automation part. But if you don't have time to look at it because you've implemented France, but then next week you need to implement, or you need to start to get ready to implement Saudi Arabia, and then the week after you need to get ready to start implementing Egypt, etc., etc., etc. If that's happening, you just don't have the capacity or the time to look at the process optimization and automation part. And that's where you have to look at, okay, so how can we be compliant as soon as possible, and afterwards maybe see how we can automate and optimize things.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Okay, that was it for I hope it was very informative for most of you. I saw some of the answers on the polls where the most common answer was mostly no. So the different types of e-invoicing models or having an e-invoicing process already harmonized. And also no to the answer where most of the companies don't have an international e-invoicing project team. I can see some questions popping up. And one question from Nicholas Quintens. Is the clearance model becoming a norm in Western Europe and Poland, meaning the suppliers are no more sending their invoices by email PDF to the customer, but directly to a government platform? I'll go ahead and answer it. I think looking at the news that came out of Germany today is that if countries like Germany start to look at it as well, it will become the norm in Western Europe. I'm talking to the government in the Netherlands, and I don't see any future date where it will be mandatory, but it might as well be, because digitalization also for governments is quite a hot topic right now. And it is something they're looking into. Belgium has announced that they're looking into mandating B2B invoicing. So I would suggest that it is something that you're going to have to be ready for in the near future, that it's not only going to be the Asian Pacific region or the American region, but it's also the Western European and in general the European region that is going to clearance modules.
One comment to your answer, because I think that we can see the rule that in the countries, especially in Nordic countries where they've got the long history regarding the invoicing, they've got already some solutions implemented, and the clearance model is rather not really proper one to make the revolution there on these markets. However, in the countries where we haven't got this e-invoicing common, like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, the Central Europe, I think that this will be the model that we will have the clearance model becoming the norm.
Yeah, but nonetheless, you see that Germany and Belgium are announcing it as well, and France as well, so you can see it moving to the rest of Europe.
Obligatory invoicing, but not the obligatory to transfer via the government as well.
Business to business in Belgium, a couple of weeks ago, business to business in Germany as well, in the new coalition accord from the three parties that made a coalition yesterday. So you can read in their accord that they're planning on closing the VAT gap and doing that with an e-invoicing clearance model. So it's coming, and it's coming quite quickly. That's the only thing I have to say to you.
Yeah, okay.
Then we have a question from Harold. Do you have a roadmap global on countries who want to implement e-invoicing in the near years that can be shared? Well, we have our platform e-invoicing global, where everything is real time and up to date whenever you have answers. And I'm sure Comarch has a small overview as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Nope.
No more questions, so we are.
Then I would like to thank everybody for joining.
Yes, thank you for joining the webinar. I hope it was interesting. For the ones that are interested, we can organize follow-up calls to discuss your projects and your situations more in detail. Yes.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for your attention, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.